Thank you all for joining us. Week 4 of 5 Mondays in August that we're doing this speaker series. Grateful you're all joining us. It's been a thrill for us. We're feeling really good about how it's been, and the fact that you're back means we're not the only ones, I guess. Just so you know, this is being recorded, and all of these events are on our website, villagardens.org. You can call me and I'll tell you where to find them. My name is Dawnine Lawrence, the marketing director here at Villa Gardens. And I just want to briefly repeat how this was started for those who may be new to this call. In the fall of 2018, Villa Gardens resident Nan Johnson wanted to make sure that everyone celebrated the centennial of the passing of the 19th Amendment in the year 2020. At that time, in the fall of 2018, she gathered a small group of women in Pasadena, and the idea of celebrating with a float in the Rose Parade on January 1st was born. Maybe you saw that float. It had Statue of Liberty, and some of the people on this call walked behind that float, 100 men and women dressed in suffrage regalia, looking like a suffrage parade, walking down Colorado Boulevard. It was really very moving for all of us who were involved. Many celebrations have been stalled due to COVID-19. I think we're all hearing now some are being regenerated and doing in this style, which is great, being that we're in the 2 weeks of anniversary right now. But Nan gathered a different group of Pasadena people, and then we got this series going. Nan Johnson, the inspiration for all of this celebration, spent much of her life in Rochester, New York, the home of the suffrage movement between Rochester and Seneca Falls. She served in the legislature in Monroe County for 20 years. She taught at the University of Rochester. She also had close civic ties to Seneca Falls, the home of the National Women's Hall of Fame and the Women's Rights National Park. There are many more accolades to talk about Nan, but for now, I'm going to pass the baton to Nan Johnson.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Dawnine, always for your overly generous comments. I am here, and I was lucky to be here and realize that once we moved here that it was going to be 2020, and we could be celebrating, which we all should be doing, the fact that we got the vote. Now, I always say that was a great achievement. It is only a work in progress. It did not, as you women all know, solve every problem for us. For instance, we didn't get our own credit at that time. It took us a long time. We're still working on all these things. We will be forever. So fine, that's an opportunity for us. And Carolyn Harris came with me right at the beginning and has been with me every moment since. I couldn't have begun to do it without her. And I can't give her enough praise for all the help that she's given me and continues to do so. And again, I marvel. I say, my God, Carolyn, how did you get all these things done in one day? You know, but she does. And she's going to talk to you today, and I want her to have time to introduce you and to tell you a little bit about the marvelous program that she's been doing called the STEM, right, Carolyn? STEM program. Carolyn, you're on.
I'm muted. Okay. Well, actually, why don't I do that in the now my daughter's calling me. I'm going to decline. Okay. Actually, I'd like to do that in the question and answer time. I think I want to give Martha her time right now. But anyway, be sure to ask me a question about our STEM program. Oh dear. Okay. Anyway, we have with us today, and I am so pleased to have Martha Zavala with us, who is the, oh dear. Let me get my phone.
We are insisting on it.
This is live, folks.
That's, yeah, that we have to say.
And listen, I hope we're among friends, because Wait until you get a hold of my presentation.
I think we are. I think that's pretty clear.
I'm very sorry about that. That was my daughter. And
Oh, look, she has on our banner that we had for the.
I know, it's lovely. I was looking
yeah,
at
I'll stand for a minute before I start my introduction of Martha.
Martha, you have one.
I'll show you the Votes for Women sash that all the people who walked behind the float wore on January 1st. I'm not of an age to walk behind the float, so but I persuaded our people to give us a banner anyway, so give me a banner anyway. And so I figured I'm just practicing and getting ready for Wednesday. Anyway, all right, today we are so fortunate to have Martha Zavala with us. Martha was elected as president of the Pasadena Area League of Women Voters in June. And when Dan talks about me, I read about Martha and I thought, oh my goodness, how can she do all of the things she does? She joined the League of Women Voters in 2015, and a year later, she was the director of voter services and responsible for voter registration and education and all that sort of thing that the League does in that election starting from 2016. So I think that we have absolutely one of the most important people to be with us today to talk about the upcoming election. She also worked for the LA County for 40 years. And some of the things that she did, I just marvel. I mean, I guess you can do it in 40 years. She helped manage the selection and replacement of the county's aging financial, purchasing, personnel, and payroll systems. Now, if you can do all that in 40 years, that's amazing. And she is one of our own from this area. She was born and raised in East Los Angeles, attended East Los Angeles College, and majored in history at Cal Poly Pomona. So I think she's going to talk today to us about the history of the League of Women Voters, which some of us may or may not know. My mother was a very big League person. I wish now I'd asked her more things about it. And also what we feel is left to do to achieve equity for women and the work of the League today. So Martha Zavala, please take it away.
Thank you very much for that introduction. I know I was getting older just listening to what my 40 years were. They were very interesting, I'll tell you. I learned a lot. But you can hear from my history is that I am a little bit typical of a Latinx community. I had to work as soon as I got out of high school and kind of work your way through trying to get an education. And again, working full time, trying to manage a family, which is the story of women all over the place, right? So I'm not that different in that respect. So let me get started. I want to, I did prepare a PowerPoint and hopefully you can all see it. I have to warn you, this is my most perfect slide. It's very clear and concise and you can see it. The rest of them are sadly lacking because it just has a whole bunch of thoughts thrown onto a slide. But don't worry, you don't have to read them. What I did is I tried to develop a concept for each page and I put it in a square box, much like what you're seeing here, about what the whole point is of what I'm going to convey. I did decide to go back a little bit to how some of what all started. Now, why are we here today? Today, we're here to celebrate because of the 19th Amendment. We've gotten together. This is the anniversary of that 19th Amendment. And I think what I want to point out here is that it says that you cannot be denied your vote on account of sex. So let's just keep that in mind. You cannot be denied your vote on that concept. The other thing is that Congress is going to have the power to enforce this article by appropriate legislation. So whoever we put in to represent us have the ability to enforce this article. So just to point out, the history of voting rights is a history of constitutional amendments, federal law, state law, and court decisions in order to get here. One of the things that we have to know is that before our Constitution, they really didn't even have a reference to voting in the Articles of Confederation. I think they probably did caucuses, you know, or they got around together and they just said, hey, this guy, a prominent citizen, is going to represent us, and you would send them to Congress to represent you. But there was really no talk about voting. When the Constitution came into play, they allowed the states to take control over all elections, which is one of the reasons why we had the Florida debacle in the year 2000, right? You heard about that problem. You didn't have that here in California, and we're a much larger state. So the issue is that all states run their own elections. They have their separate election codes, and each person, each resident citizen in each state has to live by that, or at least it did when we first started. And that history has also been an issue of male suffrage. That's how it started off. Their only concept was for men to vote, and only 6% of them at the time of the population could actually vote. So it's not as if just women are struggling for this. Ultimately, when they started expanding the vote, it was a huge expansion. Only 100,000 or so people, males, white males were voting in 1820. And then by 1940, you had 2.5 million had been able to acquire the franchise, until finally, the Constitution was changed and said that you can't be denied the vote on the basis of race. So now, as we see, on the basis of race came up first, male suffrage expanded, and then ultimately women win the vote. And now under the Constitution, you cannot be denied on the basis of sex. So it's race and sex, and those two things are protected. Subsequent to that, we had federal laws and court decisions all starting to expand the vote, a continuous stream of voter expansion and protection. Until 1965, we had then the Voting Rights Act that also abolished a lot of the constraints that were put in place. The expansion of the vote to 18-year-olds as a result of the Vietnam War. On August 29th, 50 years ago, I was tear gassed out of Salazar Park, advocating for the end of the Vietnam War and to change and pass the amendment to move that voting age. So during this time, during this expansion, we're talking about us now. We're contemporaries to this. We've lived through this process. And as we move forward and try to expand those rights, suddenly we had a 2013 court decision that came in and struck down a part of the Voting Rights Act as unconstitutional, and has since resulted in voter suppression again. So if you wonder why you're seeing so much voter suppression, closing local polling places and strict ID laws, it's because of that change in the court. They stopped some of the protections, some of the key features of that act were struck down by a conservative court. And so we're still back where we were before, trying to fight and trying to expand voting for everyone. So our history started off in the temperance movements. I don't know if you can see it or if you can actually move your Zoom and where you see people around until you can see the entire screen. But it has been that women were active way in advance. Back in the 1920s, they had already started for suffrage. This was before the Civil War. And there were men and women who were fighting, as we talked about it before. The men also didn't all have suffrage, right? They had to be property owners and all of these things. Well, men and women were working together since the beginning, and abolitionists. So there were also Native Americans, excuse me, our slaves or former slaves or free Black men fighting for abolition. So from the beginning, it has been this fight the vote. And of course, then we come to the historic convention at Seneca Falls, the Women's Rights Conventions. And again, as you can see, ladies and gentlemen, we're all together and attended by abolitionist Frederick Douglass, and also moving forward again to try to advance those rights of people. And I think, his comment here, power concedes nothing without a demand. And it never did and never will. And I think it makes you think a little bit about what's happening in our streets right now and the demand that is being made for power to be shared. So the question for us is, we have a history of expediency or compromise to move ahead. Which is it? I think expediency has a negative connotation, but you want to think, do you have a negative connotation to compromise when you think about the stranglehold that we have right now in Congress over a lot of things? How do you feel about it? Because one of the things that happened is that the suffrage movement split after the Civil War, when they were trying to move toward suffrage for Black men and all women. They split. They decided that, it was too risky to ask men to vote, to give women the suffrage, to ask white men to give women the suffrage, and it was better to just move forward and try to get suffrage for Black males because it was going to be too much and they weren't going to get enough votes. But basically that split took place over another thing. They couldn't decide whether to push for a constitutional amendment or to go locally to all the states and try to get that done. Remember, the states are the ones who run elections. So there was a split there that took place right before the ratification of the 15th Amendment. And it remained that way for quite some time. During all of this, starting in 1869, however, all of the different states were starting to act. In 1969, the Wyoming Territory wasn't a state yet, granted all female residents 21 and older the right to vote. And then at that point, the National Women's, the National, my hands are twitching, the National Women's Suffrage Association then gathered enough influence to try to lobby the US for a constitutional amendment. So I don't know how many of you are aware that actually when the 19th Amendment was passed, it wasn't the first time they'd actually gone through to do that. it had already been tried in 1878, and it was defeated on the Senate floor. So there was that struggle, but again, it was one of those of finally the two groups that had split of cooperating and getting back together again. In 1890, the National Women's Suffrage Association and the American Women's Suffrage Association merged together for the National American Women Suffrage Association. And the founders, Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Carrie Chapman Catt, and Lucy Stone, were really the ones that put that together. And then ultimately in 1900, Carrie Chapman Catt stepped up to lead that organization. And so one of the things, I don't know if you're aware, that suffrage in California came in 1913. So we did have the vote in the state before the national movement. But one of the things that happened in 1913 was that there was another, started that history. There had been marches before in the late 1800s, but this one was about the women's movement, and it was actually the first movement of that century. And they were making their appeal once again and wanted to get the president's support behind it. So all of these marches were designed to raise awareness and to make sure they pressed for support. And I don't know if you can see in the picture that there are a lot of the universities are represented here. University of Missouri, Washington College, Leland Stanford, Bryn Mawr, and so on. So there were a lot of, it was again, I guess, a student action. Eventually, President Wilson changed his mind about supporting women's rights, and he kind of used the excuse of the World War I, and also focusing on the fact of how many women were actually in the war effort, and trying to advocate then finally for the passage of the 19th Amendment. So again, it's a history of success. They did in fact end up with that vote coming through, and finally in October of 1918, Wilson did go ahead and propose that it be passed, but it did fail in 1918, and then they brought it back a year later and finally had it pass the Senate. And you can see by the votes here that the measure passed the House quite resoundingly. As you know, in Congress, the House is more closely tied to the populace than the Senate ever is. And so it's always a good thing to have the House behind a particular bill. So when you're lobbying, you really want to get the House behind you. And then the US Senate is much harder to do because of the length of service that they put in for each term. And so they're less responsive to what you may want. So that takes quite a bit of work. So again, finally in March of 1920, 35 states had already ratified it, and finally the Tennessee vote in August. And that's what we were talking about early on. August 18th is actually when the vote was ratified by the states, right? One of the process that goes through first is that Congress has to kind of approve the law, just like a lot of the legislation that takes place in our state. The legislature will pass a taxation bill, which then has to be approved by the people, right? In this case, an amendment, when you come through an amendment and it's put before the Congress passes it, then it has to be passed out to the states so that they can go ahead and ratify that change. So the first process, that first win came through as a result of the young man we talked about last week, Mr. Byrne, and his mother. and you'll see a picture of her here, and that it was, you know, in history's, in history, it was left to Tennessee to flip that vote to make it the next, the 36th to ratify. And it fell to this 23-year-old young man to basically listen to his mother and vote in favor of the amendment. And here's the other date we talk about, August 26th. And that's the date that it's actually signed into law. And that's why we have these different dates that come up all the time. I do want to note something that it's now called Women's Equality. And I think equality, the use of the term equality is pretty good, but I'll talk later about a better term. On November 2nd of that same year, 8 million people across the US voted in the election for the first time. So you have to think about this. It actually passed on August 1920. And when we think about the lack of social media, can you imagine? They must have been using telegraphs, who knows what they did, and all the activism it took to get 8 million people ready to vote in November. That's a short ramp-up time. I wish we could do that right now. I don't know how you know, to say how amazing that was, but it did take an additional 60 years to March of 1984. Again, this is our time before states actually finished ratifying that amendment, and all of them kind of fell into place. I think that's, you know, it's very telling. So here comes the League of Women Voters. Did you know that we're older than the 19th Amendment? I think I mentioned to you that in 1900, Mrs. Catt was leading the National American Women's Suffrage Association, and they held another conference, another national conference that they were holding. And the year before, in 1919, because some of you may have heard, hey, you know, the 19th Amendment since last year. Well, again, it was because Congress had at that point passed the legislation itself. It hadn't gone into ratification yet. But when they held their national conference, they were so confident that it would pass that they changed their name and decided, you know, we're now the League of Women Voters. I mean, I would love to have that kind of confidence on a lot of things. And so that's what they did. They founded that. We celebrated this past February 14th, Valentine's Day. I think you all may be aware what happened on February 15th, 1920, marked 100 years from the day Susan B. Anthony was born. She was born February 15th, 1820. Of course, she never saw this day, but it's kind of significant, I think. We actually celebrated that day, our league, the Pasadena Area League. We had a gala celebration on the 15th to mark the century. But it was one of the last in-person celebrations that we were able to host. So we did do some celebrating in person. 20 million people were eligible to vote, and only 8 million made it to the polls. And I think that's a lot about their efforts that they put in. 8 million is a huge number, but it also is representative of the kind of struggle that we have today, that we have a lot of registered voters and not all of them show up to the polls. Not taking advantage of the rights that they have, because, you know, even back in that time, there were a lot of people that didn't believe, a lot of women didn't believe that a woman had a place outside the home. And so you have to wonder if some of them didn't know about it, or if they really chose just not to go out and vote. But there were a sufficient number there to make a difference. from the beginning, the League of Women Voters has been very, very active. I'm not sure if you're aware of what the 1922 Cable Act for Independent Citizenship of Married Women. What would happen is right after the World War I, lots of GIs were coming home and they were bringing home European women, right, from across the sea. And what would happen is that once the man got married to a foreign national, it was no big deal. But if a woman did that, she would lose her citizenship upon getting married to a foreign national. She couldn't hang on to it. And so the Cable Act, the League of Women Voters got together to pass that act to allow women to retain their citizenship. And of course, it was the biggest get out the vote campaign that next November to get the 8 million voters in the November election. That was of 1920. But so the League of Women Voters, we always say, you know, we are highly political. What we are is nonpartisan. In other words, we're never going to support or oppose any candidates for political office. For us, it's all about our positions. And we don't take any of these positions lightly. We study the issues. Sometimes it takes us a couple of years to gather all the research data from universities and research centers anywhere to figure out what position to take. And then we go ahead and move forward to try to influence law, pass laws, and influence public policy, sue people if we have to, just to move forward our agenda, that expansion of rights, not just for women, but for everyone. Remember, if you have someone whose rights are being squeezed out, we're all at risk. And that is a profound belief that we have. And the other is, of course, that every single voter has to play their role, however small or large it could be. In this day and age, it could be just sharing a tweet, forwarding, sharing a Facebook message, anything to advance our causes or their cause, whatever it may be. And so some of you may wonder, okay, so, what are we doing? This is one thing that I wanted to share for sure, is that it's actually the LA League, but everybody in a state is attempting to participate. It's the Los Angeles League of Women Voters that is going to be sponsoring an event. You can go to their website, and all you have to do for all of us is, we have local chapters, as you know, the US League at the top, with the state leagues cascading below, county leagues, and below that the local leagues. And City of Los Angeles is one of them. So you always just type LWV and the name of the city, or the county or the state, and you can find us pretty easily. And they're going to have a celebration of the 19th, and I recommend you go to that. They're going to have a really great panel of speakers. It's coming up, I think, in another couple of days. So you have to kind of jump on it and hope you're not doing something else. We ourselves are partnering with the city of Pasadena on the Women's Equality Day, August 26th. It's going to be a social media campaign. We want you all to take snapshots of yourself, post them, take pictures of somebody else, have a saying, anything, but we want to have essentially a social media storm, whether it's Facebook or something else. You can encourage your friends, neighbors, daughters, sons to go ahead and participate, so you can spread that word. I don't have the details from the City Hall Rotunda yet, but they are going to light it up. So if you want to take a drive, my husband and I, due to COVID, don't go anywhere, but we do get in our car and we go as far as a bio break distance is what we call it. So we drive away and then we say, okay, we need to get back in an hour. And we turn around and we come back. So if you're able to do that, the City Hall at night will be lit up and in order to celebrate. And then of course you can create your own celebrations, however you do, get a group of you together and have a glass of wine or adult beverages as they call it. And so have your own celebration. We are in fact going to be having the way we celebrate is let's expand the vote to more people. So we're going to have an in-person voter registration event on Saturday, August 29th from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. And we're going to be outside in the parking lot of the Children's Museum because we don't want people risking their health. To register voters and to help citizens participate in the census. We're going to get out there. We're targeting people that may not, again, be in touch with us. So we're trying to do posters and try to get word of mouth out to let people know that we're there to help them and answer questions. So we do want to get at low propensity voters and people who have not yet responded to the census. So that's how we celebrate. We have a voter registration event of some sort. This one does happen to be in person. The other way is we're changing our website to celebrate the election. And we want it to be like a one-stop shop, basically 2 clicks away from the information you need. So you come to our website and you're not sure, what to do with your vote by mail ballot, or you're not sure if your voter registration is up to date, you can easily go find that information without having to navigate through more complex websites from the state or from the County of LA. So that is, one of the things that we're attempting to do. And of course, the election events, we're going to have several pros and cons. And we're going to be able to try to record those and make them available. And then we're going to also have candidate forums like for mayor. So we're working on that now. And hopefully you'll come to our website, get the dates and everything and participate in those. What's left to do? I like this. It's the ERA. And you may be familiar with Alice Paul, that she and her Silent Sentinels did work very hard to pass that 19th Amendment. They endured a lot of verbal and physical attacks, and we talked about the fact that she was force-fed and was threatened really to be put away. I think that's what they did. That's how they handled women who didn't know their place. They were always, threatened with perhaps being put in asylums and things like that because they maybe just wouldn't shut up. And so she was one of the leaders of that movement. And, but the write-ups in the papers really got a lot of sympathy from people in terms of advancing the 19th Amendment. So it was Alice Paul who then came up with a concept of the Equal Rights Amendment to guarantee women constitutional protection from discrimination. And she continued to spend all her life. And as you know, this was way back, after in 1920. And finally in 1970 or so, the Equal Rights Amendment was finally put before a vote. It got passage, but it never got ratified. So since that time, the LWVS has actually supported and pushed for ratification of the Equal Rights Amendment. Well, when Virginia became the 38th and final state needing to ratify the ERA, the League of Women Voters re-upped its commitment to actually pass the ERA. Not sure if you had heard of that or not, but the US League actually has a toolkit and a response to advocate for that. Now, we know it's not going to happen anytime before this election. So you will be hearing more from us about the ERA just after we win. Well, I guess for us, the win is to have everybody come out for the election. So, so we are going to be making a push. So what we would advocate for you to do is to visit our website, the LWV, the usleague.org, and take action. And you'll find information there about how to move forward the Equal Rights Amendment, because we're not done. So again, you know, we do have more action that we would like you to take. We still have a lot of work to be done right now to fight voter suppression for the November election. And again, you can go to lwv.org to take action. And we're really trying to move forward the For People Act to get a hearing, to demand a hearing for that act, to further fund and protect voting rights for this election. So please, that's really what the message is here, is our fight's not over, and we would like you to join and actually make this right. We are blessed to be in California, but not everybody else has that same thing. And I think it should not be an accident of where you are born or where you choose to live in which state to really reap the benefits of being an American. So we urge you to come and follow us, and we have all the tools available to try to make it easy for you. We let you find who your representatives are. We have sample letters and all ready for you to just take action. So in celebration of the 19th, I urge you to go ahead and do that. As we know, voting is people power. And if you have any questions, you can go ahead and email our league at voterservices@lwvpa.org if you need services from us or you just have questions.
Okay, we wanted to open it up for Jean. Do you want to unmute? There you go. Oh, you muted again.
There she, nope.
Carolyn had some words. I do just have one question.
You're echoing. You're echoing,
Carol.
Are you near another microphone? Because you're echoing.
Carolyn,
You want me to mute?
you start.
Oh, okay. Did you? If you just said you want to speak, you should just raise your hand like that, and he is going to be calling on people.
Everybody's echoing.
Okay.
I thought it was just me.
We thought so too. But all the news is.
I think there's somebody who has audio on 2 platforms, and we're all hearing that on that cell phone and or you're in the same room with someone else, you can have the other person turn off their mute themselves.
The cackle.
Everyone should mute themselves.
Unmute.
Unmute. I am unmuted.
And now it's gone away.
Yeah.
Everybody's quiet.
I don't
Go
know. It
ahead.
sounded like a waterfall in the background.
Go ahead, Jean.
Well, it's better. Yes. So raise your hand if you have a question, please. And maybe Martha, I would start off. Is there, do you have any sheet that you publicize with information on the propositions
That's a good question.
that is available to certainly that residents at Villa Gardens, but to anybody?
Yes, we do. We should have them by the first week in September. They will be generated by our state league, the state of California, with the 12 propositions that are up. Including, we have the other one. So we have that publication and what's called an easy voter guide that contains the state level information on it. And absolutely, that's why I say, if you go to our website, you can sign up and we will push information out to you.
Okay.
As an organization, you can send an email to us. And if you're asking for the information that we have, then we can send it to you. So there's two ways. As an individual, you come to our website, you sign on and you say, I want to know about pros and cons. I want to get whatever publications you have. I want to get your monthly publication that we put out also. Whatever it is, it allows you to ask for that. We're at Voter Services. I can provide that information to Villa Gardens and see how you might want to distribute it to your attendees.
Thank
How
you.
about front porch?
Yeah, that would be good.
In Villa Gardens, you're right, Donnie.
Front porch.
Any questions?
Oh,
I see. Okay, Marty?
Yes, I would recommend that we distribute it to front porch communities, not just Villa Gardens.
I agree. I would.
And I want to commend Martha. She was dissing her own presentation early on, and it was very informative. I really appreciate what you did and the slides you put together.
oh, thank you so much. I have, I'm really bad. I never had a boring day in school. I could never understand when people said that, but I love history. I was a history major, and no little detail is too, useless or whatever. I have a lot of appreciation for all the work individuals have put into all of this rich events in our communities that have taken place. And everything seems important to me.
I have one more question. Can I ask it?
Please.
Have any of you seen Mrs. America, which kind of puts the Phyllis Schlafly in the middle of the defeat of the ERA? And I just wondered, was she really that instrumental in defeating it?
Yes.
I kind of think she wasn't.
No, she was.
She was.
She was.
I think she allowed people who had some qualms. Change is really hard for a lot of people. And when you have made a commitment in your life to let's say yourself in some way, and you've been successful in that environment, it gets scary to think of a change, right? Because right away they start talking about, oh, well, you want to be a soldier now and go to war. And they start thinking about, well, now you want to, shoulder responsibility for maintenance of your own family, not recognizing that women were already doing that to a large extent, just not getting paid for it, but scared. And so if you see somebody in the news mirroring some of your own fears, that's very effective. I think she had a lot to do.
She
with it.
validated people who had their own feelings of questions about women, because remember, for how many years we have been told that women's place was not in activation. And it's hard to remember sometimes that really what we were a revolution. I know you know that word, but we were a revolution against a colonization. Great Britain, the greatest country in the world. And we followed the common law. And the common law said women have no real rights. When they married, he was it. And they had no rights to children, to property, to anything else. And that there's a very, very strong part of what women were taught to be validated. That was their only way of being validated. So change, as Martha was saying, change is very difficult. We know that right now, how difficult change is to bring about, and how difficult it's going to be to bring about all the change that we know we need to make now. And I'm, as Jean knows, always an optimist. And so I look on what's happening now and all the difficulties as an opportunity to bring about some of that change and to come together and understand it, not just in this nation, but for women and men all over the world. Understand this is a time of change and opportunity for us, but that's hard.
Funny story, I was actually scheduled to debate Phyllis Schlafly in Texas.
Oh my goodness.
After I'd written a book, and she canceled, so it never happened.
Oh, when was that?
That was in the 70s.
Yeah.
That's amazing, but she was unfortunately quite influential.
Yeah.
Yeah, and articulate and passionate.
Nancy, you have a question.
Well, no, I've just had heard that Phyllis Schlafly was the spokesperson, but big business really didn't want women to have more.
They did.
Women more.
That's true, because the whole business of equal pay and all of those different things came into it. Childcare, all those issues became part of it, and they, of course, are still a question for us.
Some things never change.
Do we have
Sally Curry, you have a question?
childcare? No.
I had a comment. When Phyllis Schlafly was holding forth and writing her book and all this stuff, there was an article in Time magazine about her and her philosophy about pleasing your husband, meeting him at the door in your teddy and all this stuff. Anyway, I said, why didn't some women do what I had done and my friends had done? Go to graduate school and learn things and make ourselves more interesting to our husbands as people. And it was published in Time magazine.
That's wonderful. Congratulations to you. That's really wonderful, Sally.
Good.
I want them to go to school and make themselves more interesting to us.
That's right.
Well, again, I always say we have to remember that there are the two sexes, at least, and
That's not all.
At least, she said.
At least, I said. We have made some progress on those areas and are continuing to do so. But still, many of us are involved with sons and brothers and husbands and fathers, and we have to be concerned about what happens to them. I mean, we've had a lot of support for many men over the years too, and I validate them, and I want them to come with us as we move forward.
I agree.
I agree. They're trapped as much as we are, and don't realize it. So we all have to kind of hold hands and move forward into this new territory.
That's
And
right.
it wouldn't be so scary if we did it that way, but instead, you know, sometimes we choose to pit ourselves against against each other because we're so, you know, we're so desperate to get what we need that it's very hard to give concessions at all.
It is, but as among others, wonderful President Barack Obama has said, you know, learning is what it's about. We don't change people's mind by saying, oh, you're stupid and you don't understand and this kind of thing. That doesn't get us anywhere. Because they feel then that they're denigrated and we're looking down on them. And that's not what we're trying to do. We're trying to say, look, we may disagree with you, but we don't feel better than you. We're not trying to dominate you. We're trying to have you understand why our point of view is different and hopefully move you along in understanding our point of view.
Any further questions?
Well, just another comment. I think men are trapped in the gender identity. And a lot of it came from the Old West, where they were out there fighting Indians and fighting for land and building fences and doing all the things they did, many of which were horrible. And, but there were women at that time who were left alone for long periods of time in their ranch houses, who were extremely independent and very strong people. There was actually a woman in who used to run a wagon train between Farmington, New Mexico and Durango, Colorado. She did this on a regular basis. And there were women who took men's roles.
Right, that happened during World War I and II.
Yeah.
And also,
Gideon, did you have a question? You have to represent, you're the sole male.
Where are you? Yes.
I was going to say, I'm the unwitting sole male representative here.
No, there are a few others.
We know how you feel.
Everybody was being very optimistic. Suddenly we're getting thrown back to the prehistory. I think we have to look also at the progress that has been made.
Very much so.
Frankly, if anyone wants a future, they have to work together. And there are many men that are very, not only supportive, but believe fundamentally that that right is there.
Right.
Same as the right to choose. And so I think we have to be careful about labeling men and the category, because I don't think the categories apply quite as much as they used to. And I think it does put me off when I get lumped in with everybody else.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
excellent statement.
Patrick is here in the background.
Oh, that's right.
Oh,
Patrick, you're
I see
another
it.
representative. Anyone else? Donnie, you want to sign us off?
I do want to remind everybody that next week we'll have a male speaker,
Yes.
Ken Morris, great-great-great-grandson, descendant of Frederick Douglass and Booker T. Washington. So I hope you'll all join us and bring your friends. I want to thank Martha for joining us today. Can we give her a little virtual round of applause? Thank you, Martha. Great presentation. Hopefully we'll see you all next week.
And do listen to Ken Morris.
Thank you, Martha, so much.
Thank you, thank you.
Oh, thank you for hanging in there.
Thank you.
See you
Yeah.
next week.
See.
Thank you, Martha.
Thank you, Martha.